Good evening. Yep. Got it. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We are here for a special council workshop, and roll call shows that Sam Coons, Tom Perry, Cheryl Robertson, and myself are present. I know a few of them. One has family who is sick and another has a work issue. So we will move on to local regulation of marijuana establishments. Just to give you a little background, council has been working at this for close to 18 months now, between trying to get ready for what would happen with the referendum, and then after the referendum, where we should go with the ordinances. Council has worked on a few proposals,
Ready for use.
basic.
That was not me.
We have gotten some, I wouldn't say they're ordinances yet, just some kind of guidelines that we're thinking about, but we really want to hear from the public as to whether we're going in the right direction, whether we're too loose, too restrictive, where we want to be. So the idea for the evening is to have our planner come up and give a brief presentation about everything that we have learned in the past 18 months and kind of some of the options of where we are at this point. And then we'll open it up to public comment, and we'll go from there. So Kyle, whenever you're ready.
Hi everyone, my name is Kyle Drexler. I'm the town planner. So as the council chair said, I've been doing a lot of research on this topic, and staff has been having conversations with council to try and do some research on best practices to see what other communities have been doing, who've already in states that already have this sort of thing. We've done some site visits to existing medical marijuana businesses in the state, just try to kind of collect and gather, sort of potential ways forward if the town were to opt in to allow for marijuana establishments. So just a brief overview, things that would be useful to keep in mind throughout the presentation is that there are two laws to consider. There's the Marijuana Legalization Act, which refers to adult use marijuana, and that's the recreational side of things. And then there's the Medical Use of Marijuana Act, which is obviously medical marijuana. So at this point, both of them are in the position where municipalities have to opt in to allow for those marijuana establishments under each category to exist and operate in the town. So currently Orono hasn't opted in. So if any one of those businesses on either the adult use or the medical side were to come in, they wouldn't be allowed currently in town. So this is really exploring, if they were to, if the town were to opt in, what would be the standards and the practices that would go into place to kind of guide that development. So moving on, there are 4 types of those establishments. They're cultivation facilities, that's where all the growing takes place. There's product manufacturing, which is more of the, not just the plant itself, but turning that into the various assortment of products that the retail stores sell. Then there's the retail stores, which are the most kind of public and out in the open that a lot of people think of when they hear this. And then there's testing facilities, which are, more of the R&D side of things, testing for potency and things like that. So probably the, biggest, farthest macro view of the topic when considering regulating these types of establishments would be looking at where would they go, so potential zoning. So this is a map of the town. The colors on there might be a little distorted, but we have our forest and agriculture district, which is in the green towards the west. And then as you go to the right, you go into the low density residential district along 95 and getting towards Stillwater. You have the commercial 1 district, towards the north in the red, and then the economic development zone in the purple. Those are, more mixtures of commercial as well as light industry, and, in the economic development zone, even some residential. And then as you cross over to the east side of 95, you get into our medium density residential, which is, kind of the pure residential neighborhood zone. The light blue to the top is the University District. Then along Park Street, you have this patch of darker red. That's our commercial 2, which is really a mixed use district. So that's smaller scale commercial with residential. And, there's another pocket of the commercial 2 down to the south there. And then our only industrial zoned area in town is Ayers Island, which is currently not really at a point where any development can take place or it can be accessed. So then looking at the 4 establishment types, where would they potentially go? So currently, normal retail stores in the town, not marijuana retail, just any retail, is allowed in the commercial 1, commercial 2, University, and Village Commercial. So the Village Commercial is, right kind of that downtown area. The way, that we've kind of looked at proposing for marijuana retail would be just in the commercial 1 and commercial 2. So that's, that Park Street corridor and the University Mall area would be the prime areas where marijuana retail would be allowed if we were to go that way. So, council kind of indicated to, it might be a good idea to keep away from the Village Commercial and away from, certain uses where, people, especially younger children, are walking around all the time, like the library and the school and all of that. Moving on to manufacturing, it's pretty the manufacturing and testing are both pretty consistent with our existing land uses. If you look at light industry or wholesale retail or something like that, they would be allowed in the commercial 1, economic development zone, and industrial districts. So again, primarily commercial 1 and economic development zone. So that's more out on 95, getting out towards the lower density residential district in those blocks primarily. And then cultivation would be allowed only in the forest and agriculture district. That was one of the ones that, as we were doing our site visits to different places, the big concern with cultivation facilities was the odor. The forest and agriculture district is already designed for the growing of various crops and different agricultural uses, so that kind of fits in well there, and it has a larger minimum lot size. So there's kind of things are more spread out there where the odor has kind of room to dissipate and not make much of an impact. Whereas if you were allowing cultivation facilities in the C1 or C2, there's the potential for residences to be closer by and there to be more of a negative impact. So beyond the zoning, getting more specific, some of the standards that we've been looking at are design standards, location, odor, security, waste disposal, and the idea of home cultivation, people growing plants for personal use on their own properties. And so before we get into some of the different ideas that we have for each of those, just keep in mind that all these marijuana establishments, if this were to go into effect, the way we've been talking about it would have to go through the site plan review process. So none of them would be permitted just through the code enforcement office. Whereas now, if a retail store is going into an existing space, they might just be required to get a permit through the code office. This would require all establishments, whether new or going into an existing building, to go through the site plan process, meaning they're going to have to meet all those criteria of traffic and parking and noise and drainage, stormwater, all those sorts of things. So these standards that we're looking at now are just in addition to that. So design, one of the, I think, images people get in their head when they look at this is, the idea of a shop with large window displays and lots of products in the window, maybe, bars on the window. So something we considered is having no plants, products, or paraphernalia visible from the exterior of the retail stores as a way to kind of blend the businesses more into the surrounding area. Also, the next one, point 2 is more of an operational thing, not so much design, but didn't have a slide for operational, so fit in here. The state law on adult use side, well, there's rules that coincide with the law. It allows retail stores to be open for business between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. They can operate other aspects of their business, but actually being open to the public is just between 7 and 9 p.m. The medical law and adult use law don't exactly line up all the time. They have differences. The adult use seems to be more specific in a lot of cases. But we've been kind of looking at writing a potential ordinance, grouping them together. So whether it's an adult use store or a medical store, they would follow the same standards because it's still a marijuana retail store either way. So that's something, that could be considered as having those limited hours and not being open, as late as maybe another establishment or business would be. Potential size limitations. Currently for any, building going into the C2 or village commercial, there's a 15,000 square foot maximum building footprint. So having, some sort of maximum retail space allowable for the marijuana retail stores to keep them at a manageable size and not really overtaking any one area. For the cultivation facilities, perhaps to start out, you could implement some standard that indicates a maximum plant canopy area. When they apply for their state license, there's different tiers for cultivation facilities that allow them a certain level of square footage for their plant canopy. 7,000 square feet allows for the second highest amount of plant canopy square footage. So maybe to start out with, that, and then as you go along and you see, if there's no issues or complaints, then, the ordinance can be changed to allow it at a larger scale. The next has to deal with signage and advertising. The state law indicates some standards in regards to this, that it can't be geared towards children. They can't use like existing candy products and try to make it look like that and those sorts of things. But to implement some sort of standard as far as, signage and advertising visible from the street level, so that, a lot of the sign isn't taken up by, the marijuana like kind of imagery. So, the way it's worded now, it's a max of 20% of the sign can be taken up by the marijuana plant image, and no pictorial representation is allowed of any other marijuana product or paraphernalia on the sign itself. So again, a way to try to blend the business in with the other surrounding businesses. And then no outdoor storage of any merchandise plants or other marijuana related materials. And this next slide is just a kind of visual representation of what I was just talking about. So on the left, there's a storefront of a marijuana store in Canada, and on the right is one of the stores, medical retail stores here in Maine that we had the chance to go visit to and speak with the owner of. And you can really see that, the one on the left is far from the worst that, I've seen, but at the same time, there's a clear difference between the one on the left and the one on the right, whereas there's the large window displays with all of the products being shown. There's multiple signs on the street as well as the large awning sign. The one on the right uses very traditional building material, and it's a very subtle sign. There's no sort of imagery associated with marijuana at all. So we really just got the feel through our site visits that the businesses that blend in more with kind of the character and surrounding area usually tend to fare better as sort of operating and having a relationship that works well with the community that it's in. So moving on to location, this is a little different than the zoning. What I mean by location here is in the adult use law, it states that no marijuana establishment can operate within 1,000 feet of a school. So that's public or private schools or any other educational facility serving children from pre-K to grade 12. But then a lot of communities beyond that add other uses with similar kind of setback distances. So beyond the school, we've looked at 1,000 feet of any childcare or daycare facility, 500 feet from the university district, and those are for all marijuana establishments. Then in addition, marijuana retail stores, could potentially have to be 500 feet from any church, chapel, parish house, or place of worship, and 1,000 feet from another marijuana retail store. So the key there is, if you look at the image here, this is the University Mall area. So if you imagine a marijuana retail store where that blue triangle is, and then 1,000 feet from that would take up the whole University Mall. So the idea is to keep marijuana retail stores from being bunched together and creating entire districts where there's multiple stores right next to each other. If you've been to a lot of towns or cities, this happens a lot with other businesses as well, whether it's hair salons or pharmacies or anything. A lot of times they go in right next to each other, and this would be a mechanism to sort of prevent that and space them out a little more. The next standard to consider would be odor. Again, this is more of an issue with the cultivation facilities, it seems, but just in general, all marijuana establishments would have to be designed to prevent detection of marijuana odors from the property line. And part of their state license application process is coming up with an odor control plan. So that should be something that they should already have in place, but through the site plan process, it's something we would be able to look at, and they would be able to identify potential odors that would kind of happen, and then state how they would address each one. And then for the cultivation facilities, as it becomes potentially more of a nuisance potential, they would possibly be required to implement ventilation and filtration systems to meet those odor standards that we already have laid out in our ordinance and our environmental standards of our land use ordinance. Cultivation facilities also, through the state law, are not required to be located indoors. They're just required to be enclosed in a locked, fenced area. But we have the ability to have them be required to be located entirely indoors and add that kind of another layer of protection from the surrounding area. And then increasing the front, side, and rear setbacks. So in the forest and agriculture zoning district where cultivation facilities would be allowed, the current setbacks are 20 feet in the front and rear, and then 10 feet on the sides. By potentially increasing those setbacks, to allow for more space to exist between neighboring properties and the establishment, and giving more room for that odor to travel before it becomes an issue. Some of the security standards, that can be looked at are having surveillance cameras, monitoring entrances and trash receptacles, making sure they're not getting, broken into. A locked area in retail stores, where they can keep the different products and cash overnight. Locks on all the doors and windows, an alarm system, and exterior lighting. And the thing to keep in mind with the lighting is that it would obviously still have to meet our lighting and glare standards. You don't want business to be lit up to the point where it becomes a nuisance in itself for the surrounding area. But I think that there's definitely a middle ground between being sufficiently lit to allow for the cameras and observers to be able to view the property, but at the same time, not being too impactful that it causes a nuisance in its own right. Waste disposal is, it's not as much of a concern. It's laid out pretty substantially, what needs to be laid out in the state law. But again, they would have to have some sort of operational plan showing that, they have a plan. They're not just going to throw all of the things away. Specifically for the manufacturing facilities, certain byproducts have to be ground up so that they can't be used if anyone were to break into any sort of trash receptacle. The dumpsters themselves, would need to be shown to not be overflowing, potentially be screened from public view. We have buffer and screening standards for other uses in town, so that wouldn't be that far away from what's already existing, and have a lid that's locked at all times when the receptacle is unattended, which again just kind of goes back to the security side of things. So last is the idea of home cultivation, what the individual person in town can do on their own property. So on the adult use side, the law allows every person to grow up to 3 mature marijuana plants, 12 immature plants, and an unlimited number of seedlings. And you can grow that on a property you live on, a property you own but you don't live on, or someone else's property if you have a written agreement with them. So hypothetically, there could be a property in a residential district where a person has agreements with lots of other people to grow their 3 marijuana plants on their property, and then you have a whole collection of plants on one single property. So the municipalities can't prevent all home cultivation. You have to allow at least the people who live at a property to be able to grow their 3 mature plants. But beyond that, a municipality does have the authority to adopt regulation to prevent other people from growing on a property that they don't live on. So it's something that was mentioned briefly the last time we had a discussion, staff and council. So that hasn't been fleshed out as much as some of the other things, but it's something to consider, and it's something to keep in mind that you could have certain areas of town where properties could be used by other people to grow their marijuana plants, but in residential districts that are denser, maybe you don't want people creating agreements to bring in lots of different plants by different people, where it's going to create issues for neighbors and things like that. So that's pretty much all of the main points that we've talked to in our discussions up until this point. So I'll hand it back to Cindy and open up for any questions and comments.
Thank you, Kyle, very much. So now I'll open up to the public. If you'd come up to the podium, we are streaming this, and if you would just state your name so that we know who you are.
Paul Smith, resident of Orono. My overall recommendation for Orono is just say no to this. It's a national industry that's seeking growth by promoting demand for its addictive and harmful product. I think if Orono were to say no, it harms no one. For those who wish to smoke the weed or eat the brownies, marijuana products will be readily available elsewhere other than Orono. Individuals remain free to grow their own on their own land, on their own property. Tax revenues from so odious an enterprise as these marijuana operations is certainly not essential to the town of Orono. And the illicit supply and sales of marijuana in Orono would be little affected by having sanctioned retail outlets. So as far as I'm concerned, I would hope my fellow residents of this town will join me in just saying no to marijuana retail sales, to the cultivation facilities, to product manufacturing and testing facilities. And I would turn that to a positive to my fellow residents of Orono, just to let's join the many other communities in Maine that'll just say no to promoting demand for these demonstrably hazardous products. Thank you.
Paul, anyone else wish to come up to the podium, sir?
My name is John Grillo, and I'm also a resident of Orono. And I do have to agree with Paul regarding the negative overall impacts of legalization of marijuana. We know that it's a mild hallucinogen to start with, meaning it does have some negative impact on our minds, our ability to judge properly, to form accurate perceptions. But I've given this matter a careful thought over a prolonged period of time. I might start also too. Thank you. Yeah. Were you all able to hear what I had mentioned? Okay, so I don't have to repeat that. I'll try not to repeat what's already known.
Sir, I don't mean to break your train of thought, but Dave, I think Counselor Kuntz cannot see behind that.
Well, I do it, but you do a better job with the technology stuff. Like,
I'm sorry, sir. Your comments are very valuable to us.
They want you to get it to that way. Can it go out through there?
keep it in this money. Cut too much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope I can get my voice around so all concerned can hear without any problems.
Thank you.
The 19th century naturalist Henry David Thoreau, who in Penobscot County, Orono, Old Town, and Bangor, those that have any interest in history, made a statement in one of his writings in Walden, I believe, which was a famous book on his life in Concord, Massachusetts, made a statement regarding druggery. This is a quote from Thoreau. "I prefer the natural sky to an opium eater's heaven." What Thoreau was basically saying, as a naturalist, he believed that fresh air is a right and a privilege that we should all be able to enjoy. The speaker made a notation regarding odors that marijuana is known to disseminate into the natural environment. And speaking as an environmentalist and a conservationist, I feel that the odor is offensive. And as far as our children is concerned, while there supposedly would be restrictions regarding marijuana locations away from young children, it's very difficult to control substances like that, that sooner or later, children are going to be exposed to this. We already know that the state of Maine and the entire country has a horrendous addiction problem. It's not only drugs. We've got alcohol, we've got tobacco, we've got gambling, we even got the lottery. As far as marijuana is concerned, which is the crux of the discussion in the meeting today, is we are promoting a message by having a pro attitude toward this particular hallucinogen. We're sending a message to our children and future generations that druggery is the way to go. And to breathe fresh air without any offensive odors is acceptable. And I have a bone to pick on that particular kind of reasoning. The issue here, my understanding, is primarily recreational marijuana and not medical marijuana. Recreational marijuana I find even more offensive because it's socially conveyed to people that it's okay to do drugs. And since druggery has become such a controversial issue, we know that the federal government opposes marijuana use on federal property. And correct me, since we have law enforcement here, if a person smokes marijuana or traffics or peddles marijuana on a federal reservation, federal property that is subject to prosecution. The state of Maine, through the referendum, the people of the state of Maine passed it and allowed it to do so. So we're also sending a very mixed signal to our children. The federal government says no, the state of Maine says yes. And what we don't need is confusion that does not benefit the community as a whole, as I see it. Medical marijuana is, to me, the subject of more scrutiny. More needs to be done to find out the basic advantages, if there are any advantages at all, ingesting, smoking, medical marijuana. But I feel that it's a negative product. And it doesn't convey to me a sense of well-being. Our respiratory system was not designed. Nature, God, if you will, if you believe in God, did not create us to have these artificial synthetic products inhaled into our system. This brings in medical marijuana, and I think a lot of physicians, specialist doctors, need a lot more research and study to find out if there are really any medical benefits. But recreational marijuana, to me, is a no-no. I mean, I don't approve it. Matter of fact, I'm sort of anti-marijuana, generally speaking. But I realize that there are other people here that may have different points of view. So I'm here basically to make my voice heard. And I do feel that it would be in the better interest, the people, the residents of the town of Orono and visitors, that if marijuana was not promoted and no longer is an issue of acceptance socially, recreationally, I think we all do a lot better. I could go on, but time is a factor, and I know there are other people who wanted to comment, so I'll just say thank you for
very
the
much, sir.
opportunity to talk.
Anyone else?
I'm Frederica Smith, also a resident of Orono, and I'm a physician, an internist, and speaking somewhat from the perspective of being an internist as well as living in this town. I feel that Orono should not permit the retail sales, manufacturing, or commercial growing of marijuana. There are significant dangers of poisoning for young children in states where marijuana has become available. They're seeing an increased incidence of childhood poisoning. And we all know perfectly well that even though it's not legal, theoretically speaking, for people under 21 to use it in the state of Maine, children get into it. We know that there's significant danger of damage to developing brains up to age 25. Some people would argue that 25-year-old brains still need some development, but certainly below that age, there's good evidence of developing brains being damaged by marijuana, and has even been some study of connections between development of schizophrenia as a result of occurring at a greater incidence as a result of marijuana use. There is also a significantly increased risk of driving under the influence accidents. I believe in Colorado, particularly, they've documented a very substantial increase in that. And one of the challenges, as I understand it, law enforcement can address this, but there are not yet easily detectable methods of measuring marijuana at the roadside. You can measure blood levels, but unlike a breathalyzer for alcohol, for example, you can't assess somebody's level of marijuana intoxication. And that makes it harder for the police to deal with accident situations. I hope that the council will reject any possibility of retail sales, commercial development, manufacturing in our town. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak?
John Hawley. Thank you, Paul, John, Frederica. Just briefly say that I, as well as a long-time 30-year resident of Orono, as a teacher in the school system, as a stepfather with a child, totally against any four of the marijuana establishments in Orono. I don't see that there'd be any upside at all, either in tax benefits, certainly not in the health and welfare and future of our town. So, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Terry Morrow, and I live at 18 Forest Avenue, and I've lived in Orono for 49 years. I've seen businesses come and go. I've seen things we've needed in this town. I've seen things that we've lost in this town. And my only comment this evening is, do we need this type of business in Orono? I say not. Thank you.
Anyone else wish to speak?
Hi, my name is Jamie Comstock. I live on Brook Street in Orono. I've been there for close to 20 years now, I think, which is amazing to me, that I've been in one place for 20 years. So by day, I'm the health promotion manager at Bangor Public Health and Community Services. I'm a certified prevention specialist. I've been working on the public health effects of marijuana, both medical and retail, since the early part of this decade. And that makes me one of the veterans in this field. I've presented to most of you all a couple of times. And my comments tonight apply to both retail and medical marijuana. There is no difference in these products with the exception of the way they're marketed. And you may not know that the term medical marijuana is actually coined by the marijuana industry so that it would be more acceptable or accepted. I'm not an abolitionist, although I agree with everyone before me in supporting that there be no marijuana licenses or medical establishments in the town. I believe that adults can make their own choices. I'm here tonight to give Orono's young people a voice because I know that a lot of times in policy making, we sometimes prioritize the needs, wants, wishes, and monetary gain of adults at the expense of our youth. So I know many of you have heard some of these things before, but some of the information I'm going to talk about tonight is new. Three things that I feel you need to understand about today's marijuana. One is that it's much stronger. The THC content is higher today than it used to be. So back in the 90s, it was around 4%, and that had risen to 12% by 2014. It's probably a little higher by now. And additionally, marijuana concentrates, those are, it's like wax, the THC concentrate in wax that a lot of our young people are using, and that, by the way, is between 50 and 80%. So anytime we as adults try to say this is the same stuff that, I had when I was younger growing up, that's not a comparison we can make with today's marketplace. The second, Dr. Smith talked about the brain developing until the age of 25. And so as preventionists, our goal is to delay the onset of initiation as long as we can. That means we try to make sure that kids don't use any substances for as long as possible because it affects the way their brains develop. The third thing is that the marijuana industry is profit driven, and like the other addiction industries of alcohol and tobacco, the marijuana industry's business model is to create new heavy users at as young ages as possible. There's a lot of money already being put into the marketing of these products, and they're actively reaching our youth right now on social media platforms and through influencers, and the adults in this room would never see that because we aren't their target market. But I guarantee you the kids at this high school and at that college and all the kids at all of these schools are seeing these today. So some of the things that we know about youth and marijuana is that the younger that youth start using and the heavier they use, the more likely they are to have addiction issues. The marijuana addiction rate for youth is 1 in 6, which is higher than the adult rate of 1 in 9, and that has to do with the brain development. In 2015 in Maine, 79% of all youth seeking treatment for substances in Maine cited marijuana as their primary substance of addiction. That was compared to 16 to 17% of those youth citing alcohol as their primary substance issue. Youth who use marijuana by the age of 15 are 3.7 times less likely to graduate from high school. They're 2.3 times less likely to enroll in college. They're 3.7 times less likely to get a college degree. And youth who use have higher rates of depression and anxiety. They have lower math and reading scores. They have problems with memory and learning. So in public health, we know that environments shape choices, and we know that youth substance use increases the more that drugs and alcohol are normalized in a community. And I don't know your name, but you said this pretty eloquently. So we know that when we just have the presence of these things in our community through events, through advertising, stores, and the general presence, that youth substance use increases. This is proven through research. For example, youth marijuana use rates are lowest in states with no form of legal marijuana. Those rates jump when you introduce medical marijuana in states, and they jump even higher when you add retail marijuana. So in Mississippi, Utah, and Indiana, all states with no legal form of marijuana, their use rates, the past year use rates for people 12 and over is 10%. And in Maine, it's 19.8%. So we have double that, that use rate. We also know that substance use increases when drugs and alcohol are easier to get. So when more stores, when there's more access points, stores are selling to minors, it's more available in the community. We're getting it through social channels. So prevention science tells us that the keys to reducing youth substance use are to reduce access and availability and to not normalize use in communities. And so any proposal to allow any kind of marijuana establishment or license in Orono runs counter to solid public health policy and prevention science. Last week, I had the opportunity to meet and hear Dr. Eleanor McCants-Katz. It's a mouthful. She's from SAMHSA, the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Here's more mouthful. She's the Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Abuse. She's a psychiatrist. She's been working in this field for a long time. And she, in her presentation, showed us a lot of United States data and then pulled that data out for Maine. And I'm going to share a few of those data points with you. So in the United States, the past year use rates of marijuana for people over the age of 12 is 15%. So that's people over the age of 12 who've used marijuana in the last year. That's 15% in the United States. In Maine, it's 23%. In the United States, 22% of young adults between the ages of 18 and 25 used marijuana in the past month. In Maine, 38% did. 22 in the United States, 38% in Maine. Daily use in the United States is just under 8%, and in Maine, daily use is just under 17%. With females, this was pretty interesting too. 19% of women between the ages of 18 and 25 in the United States used marijuana in the past month, and in Maine, that number was 40%. So in Maine, our rates are much higher than national rates already. So why is this important? Dr. Smith alluded to some of this too, because studies link marijuana use to depression, anxiety, suicide planning, and psychotic episodes. Though it's unclear if marijuana is the cause, there is definitely a link. Major depressive episodes among youth and young adults are rising. Again, Maine rates are much higher than national rates. Young adults who are frequent marijuana users are more likely to have suicidal thoughts, plans, and attempts. Marijuana use in the past year in the same 18 to 25 age group is correlated with opioid misuse, heavy alcohol use, and serious mental illness. So I do appreciate all of the work that you have done on this, but I still firmly believe that it is our responsibility to all of the kids in this community, including those at the university. We just passed a bond measure to measurably improve our schools. And you would imagine that part of that goal would be to help our kids along in their life. And so I wonder why we would intentionally sabotage this effort and the future of our young people by welcoming this industry into our town. Our kids are our future residents. They're our future homeowners. They're our future taxpayers. And if we want this community to survive and thrive, we need to do everything that we can to give them that chance. And we don't need to place barriers in their way. So I made some copies of parts of her presentation that I wanted to share with you. So
Does anyone else wish to speak? Yeah.
Jamie, it looked like you had prepared remarks.
yeah.
Could you just make sure that I get them before you go so that I can?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't able to take notes with all the numbers that you used. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Stuart Dexter, a 55-year resident of Orono. So I had to get that in. Whenever we have a meeting, I have to get up to say something. I appreciate what everyone said here, and I agree with them all. I don't know where the state of Maine made this legal. I don't see where someone living in Orono has to have all of these things available. If Orono did, and I'm sort of disappointed that there aren't 600 people sitting out here giving advice. But anyway, if Orono approves it, and whatever items they put on it to keep it civil and keep it under control, over the years it's going to slip away. And we say someone has to be at least 21. 5 years from now, it's going to be 19. Another 10, it will be 15 years old. And it sounds like from the last presentation, there's a lot of people, at least in the state of Maine, that are using marijuana. So apparently it's going well. So I guess Orono doesn't have to be one of those places that says, come here, you can get whatever you want. So anyway, just to go on record, I'm voting no on doing anything in this area. But however it's going to be decided, I don't know if it's the council that's going to decide this. It will be the council. So the council, the Southern councilors, they're going to be speaking for 10,000 residents or 9,000. And I'm sure if we had a vote today for the town of Orono, the town would be voting yes, we want this. I can't see Orono saying no on it. And I hope I'm wrong on that. But anyway, good luck on your decision because it's going to be on your shoulders. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Does anyone else wish to speak? No?
All views are welcome.
Well, thank you very much for the people that did speak. Before I turn it over to Sophie for next steps, I would just like to say to those watching on YouTube that please email counselors your opinions. We welcome all sorts of discussion. We will probably take this up, and I'll turn it over to Sophie probably in the fall, right?
So the next time that we're scheduled to take it up, at least for discussion, would be July 29th at the next scheduled council workshop. Doesn't mean that council won't give me guidance before then to bump it until September. We're not scheduled to do anything in August. Council asked for vacation, and I'm happy to oblige. But that would be the next time, would be July 29th. So the next steps are, at this point, council really wanted to hear from the community, and we're going to give some opportunity for those folks who are going to watch this, hopefully watch this video on the website, to give their feedback, collect all of that, and the next step will be for council to have a discussion about what it wants to do next. There really isn't a plan at this point other than to say that they wanted to hear from the community. So the next step will be to evaluate what they've heard and decide whether or not they want to move forward to opt in, and if they opt in, what the regulations would look like. But until that point that council takes an affirmative action, then the law of the land is that there will be none of these license types issued or activity allowed in the town of Orono. So the longer it takes, it's not like we're putting ourselves at risk moving forward. So I think that's why council wants to be very deliberative and make sure that they have the pulse of the community.
So that works. Thank you again for coming. And Sophie, do you have anything for a brief manager's update? No. All right, then I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So, second.
All right, all those in favor? And thank you very much.